Okay. All right. We are live. How is the audio? Okay. Definitely weird to see the delay between my screen and what's happening on YouTube. But I will try not to get distracted by it. Fantastic. Welcome, welcome. First people coming into the stream. Let's wait maybe 1 or 2 more minutes before we head this off. Fantastic. Okay. I didn't do anything. I could adjust the settings here, but I guess I rather touch nothing to not jinx it. That's good. All right. Guten Morgen, Lipsend. Good to see you. Good to read from you. Happy you're in the stream. Welcome, welcome to Hobby 101. First people coming into stream. Definitely time for a coffee, no matter the time zone. I'm one of those people that drinks a coffee 2 hours before bedtime. So I understand the need for coffee intake. So then I would say let's kick this off. There will definitely be more people coming in, or at least hopefully. But let's start now. Welcome to Hobby 101, your class for all the tips that you might need to hobby in our beautiful hobby area, and I will discuss tools like brushes, paints, whatever you might need to start off with, some neat how-tos, and definitely also some painting tips and tricks. If you might have any questions, I very much see this as a conversation at the table with me sitting in front of you as someone that might have a few questions. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I have a little window here open to read the chat. So feel free, and happy to have a little back and forth on this. But definitely we'll do a little bit of talking now and following a little bit of my plan. A few words about me. My name is Matayus. I'm in the server for 5.5 years-ish now. Since then, I didn't paint any miniatures before, so definitely started right before jumping into the Squidmar server, and nowadays paint mostly for TTRPGs, but I also had my fair share in some army painting, but definitely pivoted to D&D, Daggerheart and the likes, and most of what I do is now tinkered to this. Definitely more of a I want to use this on the table painter than I put this in my display cabinet painter, but definitely also in the ever achieving search for improvement. Hey, yeah, Tomate, good to have you here. Yeah, that's me, and yeah, let's start out here in this. Yeah, there's sometimes also a little guest here. Welcome. So yeah, what is it what you need to start out with on the hobby? There's a few things that you might need, and by the end of this, I hope you have a better overview over what you might need and have a little bit more tips and tricks as to what you can do, and maybe something you didn't know. And by the end, you also have my 3 must-have items or tools that definitely will help you improve on the table and make your life as a painter easier. So let's start out. What do you need to start to paint? So definitely easy is a miniature. Whatever excites you is definitely the way to go. Miniatures come in various shapes, forms, sizes, and from various manufacturers. Most people on the Squidmar server, I think, paint miniatures from Warhammer or Warhammer systems, but there's many other systems that you can find miniatures for. So yeah, miniatures are usually coming in plastic these days, but there's also systems like Infinity that usually mostly produce in metal, which comes with its own challenges and or maybe advantages or disadvantages, but we can also talk about this. So yeah, you definitely need miniatures to paint, and I will also build a miniature today with you to give you a little bit of tips as to how to assemble a plastic mini. We'll also say a few words as to how to assemble a metal mini, because it's a little bit different. So yeah, you need minis. You also need brushes. I just give a general overview and we go into detail later. You definitely need brushes. You can definitely start off with something more cheap from the dollar store or something like that. Or if you're really lucky like me, a little bit of a sneak peek here, you already got your hands on the new Squidmar Synthetics that will be released soon. I got the honor to get my hands on these a little early and test them a little bit. But yeah, you definitely need a good brush that is suitable for mini painting, but you can start out very cheap to see if you really like it, because you do not want to invest too much money and then find out it's not your cup of tea. But this is what you also need as a mini, a brush, and you also need some paints. Most people use acrylic paints like this one from AK, or like Vallejo paints are very widespread. Or yeah, if you buy in a Warhammer store, you get Citadel paints. These come not in these pots, but if you want to make your life easier, you can also transfer them into these droppers. Usually it's easy for you to get those that are available, that are sold in your friendly local game store. They carry often, I don't know, Army Paint, Vallejo, or other paints, so definitely grab what is available, or maybe you even have some IKEA paints, but for these more cheaper paints that are not made for miniature painting, they usually have bigger pigments in them, and then it will be hard to get a smooth finish on the Mini in the end. And then you need something to paint on. You can definitely use a normal plastic palette that maybe looks a bit like this, or they have come in other shapes. You can put paint in here. Disadvantage here is if you put the acrylic paint in there, they usually dry really fast. But you can use it, it's fine. You can also just use a plate if you really want to start out cheap, just a plate from your kitchen. That's definitely possible. If you are someone like me and fell into the trap of the GW paint palette paper trick, you could also use one of those if you have them or someone gifted them to you. Definitely not invest in this, but you could also use that. Most people, however, use something called a wet palette, which we'll also discuss a little bit later, which keep your paints fresh for a longer time. You see it a little bit here on the side on the screen to have something where you can put your paints on. But a normal plastic palette or a plate will suffice to start. Now, what is the process when you want to start out in this hobby? Usually when you buy minis, they come on these sprues in little pieces. You can also buy them already assembled, but usually if you buy new boxes, your minis will come on these sprues, and then you need to get them off that sprue. How do you do that? So there's two things I would like to talk about here. One is a clipper. That can also be a rather cheap one you already have at home, or you can invest a bit more to have a better cutting experience, which definitely makes a difference for you. So what do you do with these clippers? You use them to cut off the minis from the sprue. And the differences between the cheaper ones and the more expensive ones, these ones, this is the Redgrass Games one, they have a really good edge and they're really sharp, so they cut really smooth and they do not damage the plastic when you cut it off, because there is sometimes stress marks when you cut the plastic with a not so sharp nipper, so they might even be material be pulled out from it. So this is then maybe if you down the road want to invest, a good investment. And then of course a hobby knife, this is the classic one. Maybe you already have this at home for other purposes, but this is something you would always need to cut some little residual plastic rests of the things you cut off the Mini, or you want to kit bash and cut an arm off and put another arm on there. But the hobby knife is definitely a tool you always need if you work on miniatures. Definitely also the perpetrator for many cuts on your fingers, so tread lightly because these blades are sharp as hell. So be careful, definitely, but it's maybe the rite of passing in our hobby to have one or two cuts. It will happen down the line. Now, what else do you need? You definitely also, once you build your miniature, what do you need to build? If it's not a push fit, you also need glue, and there's different kinds of glue. There for plastic miniatures, there's things like this, which is called plastic cement or plastic glue, which is a glue specifically made for plastic. Because what it does is, it's not only gluing it together, it chemically melts the sides of the plastic together and eventually makes it one piece of plastic, more or less, right? So which also means be careful when you put it on the wrong places of the plastic mini, and then you push the pieces together, there might be a nice thumbprint on the face of that expensive miniature you just bought. So be careful because it really melts the plastic away. Then there's also super glue, which probably most of you have already used, which works a bit differently, but can also be used to glue together plastic or even also metal, because metal or resin is not activated by the plastic glue, so you need super glue here to glue those together. And they also come in various sizes. I really like this one from Tamiya. This is the extra thin. It is really extra thin and super thin and really flows into all the cracks, which makes it really easy for me to apply it. And then you can just hold the pieces together, touch it lightly with a brush applicator that is on here, and then it flows in the cracks and you push it slightly together, and then it almost fills the hole up, or the crack up a bit, which is very neat. But you can also use like more gel like glue, that is also no problem. So now you've built your miniature, and what do you do now? Very advisable is to prime it. So there's things called primer, which is a special kind of paint that really sticks to your miniature, be it plastic or something else. And then when you put paint on this, this will also make the paint stick much better to the primer instead of the bare plastic or metal, because otherwise this could then rub off easy with extended use or flake off with metal minis. So it's really advisable to prime a mini. And probably the easiest way to prime a miniature is with a rattle can. This is one I bought a while ago from Vallejo, but there's also quite a few brands, Army Paint, Citadel, Stylen, Res, Mr. Hobby, or whatever what is available to you. There's a lot of debate as to what's the best rattle can primer, and there's definitely quality differences between them, but usually you get what you can get your hands on, and then use that. What is very important, and what is a neat trick, a neat tip, is for spray cans, because there's this issue you sometimes have that the spray paint comes out a bit chalky or leaves actual flakes or just texture on it. This happens because the paint, that when you spray it out, dries before it hits the mini, or dries quickly before. This can be due to temperature or humidity in your area. There's different factors for it, so it's definitely good to first give it a good shake if it stands around for a while, and two, put it into hot tap water for like 10-15 minutes. Like not boiling water, not that the can explodes, but just have a little bowl with hot water from your tap and just throw the can in for 10 minutes. This will warm up the paint, makes it a bit more smoothly, and also ever so slightly increases the pressure, so the paint will come out a bit more smooth. And then also be careful not to drown your mini in the primer, so it's good to do a few test sprays and then see how it works. This is definitely the fastest way to prime minis, since you can do a lot of minis at once, because you just line them up on a stick and then you just spray all over them a few times. So it's really fast if you have the right conditions, but it's very fast. It is, however, very smelly because of the solvents in there. So you definitely should not do it inside if you do not want to smell it like a graffiti store. So do it outside in an area where it's okay. Do not do it inside. And even then, also a point for me to not do that anymore unless I prime bigger terrain pieces, for example, is it definitely smells even after being primed for quite a bit. So you would need to keep it outside. Good questions. I mean, who needs the brain cells? If you even have some left. But maybe the two last ones that dance tango, appreciate if you do not inhale it inside. Keep it outside for a bit, even after priming, so the biggest stank can go off, and then you can take it inside again. What else? These days, however, there's also other primer you can get in these bottles. This is also Vallejo surface primer. This is usually made to apply via the airbrush, but you can also brush it on, which is something I sometimes do. If I have a little bit bigger priming session, I do it also via the airbrush, but you can very well just put this primer on a plastic palette and ever so gently prime your mini per brush. This is definitely doable and does not smell. It just has that nice acrylic smell, I would say. So this is definitely something you can do if you have either yourself being very sensitive to that smell from the spray cans, or live with people that are very sensitive to it. This could be a solution for you, or if you have no place to prime outside, or even if you do not have an option to have an airbrush at home, you can definitely use this to brush it on. It will take a while for sure, because you just go all over the mini with it, but it is doable. I sometimes do it if I'm just lazy and do not want to put up the airbrush. I just prime one mini with a brush, and then you also already just went all over it with a brush, and makes you a little bit more familiar with it. So now we have our mini primed, and we have it dried. It also depends on what kind of primer you use, how long it should dry. To be really safe, I would say let's wait 12 to 24 hours. Also depending on maybe if you gave it zenithal in the end. I will explain later what that is if you don't know it. But definitely 12, better 24 hours to be really safe that the primer is really cured, and you also then not accidentally rub it off if you touch it or paint it afterwards with a brush. Now you have built it, primed it, and it is dried. What do you do now? So now you need some paints, obviously, and there's different brands as we discussed. Get what it is available, and then you can start putting paint onto plastic. So maybe a few more words about paints. There's a few different types of paints, maybe also a little excursion into or beyond acrylics. There's a few different brands on the market that sell different products. So maybe the most common ones are Vallejo or Army Painter. They usually come in these dropper bottles, and there's acrylic paint in there that you can use to put them on your miniatures. But there's also other brands like, for example, Scale 75. They sell these artist paints. They are really thick, so you definitely need to thin them a bit more, and they do behave a little bit differently. I don't think they're as difficult as sometimes people describe them to be. You just need to thin them a little bit more. You definitely cannot put them on the mini as they are, because they're very thick and they have very intense pigmentation. And then there's also other paints like oil paints, but maybe if you're interested in the end or have some questions, we can discuss this. But this is more a hobby 102 discussion. But there's also oil paints. They also come in tubes, but they are definitely different and more difficult to handle, I would say, since you need spirits instead of water to thin them and to apply them. And they definitely behave differently. They do give a lot of advantages as well, but not something I would recommend for your first foray into miniature painting. Now we have built a mini, we have primed it, we have put our colors on the palette, and then we can start painting, basically. Few extra things for the painting step. One thing I find really comfortable is if you have some of these miniature holders. This is an older one from Citadel, and you just put your mini in here, and it gets held by these little spring clamps, and it is very nice to hold. Then you don't need to hold the mini directly in your hands, which is also possible, which is what I did in the very beginning when I started out. But if you paint over longer periods of time, for one evening, maybe even a few hours, it definitely is a bit uncomfortable to grab to the base or the mini itself. So I really like to use these holders. They even come in a bigger size for the bigger bases, but you also can get 3D printed variants these days. So definitely lots of different versions available. There's also some that have like this little little thing on the side where you can rest your hand on to have more control. But this works out for me pretty well. And also for some other things you might need, is definitely when you look at basing, there's these thing called texture paints. This is also one from Vallejo here, but there's many other brands sell different versions. This is what you put on the base that mimics basically an earthy or stony floor. There's definitely some texture, and depending on how you paint it, then it looks like sand or some rock. These come in different sizes. There's even something like crackle paint, so you put it on thick on some reddish, yellowish, and then it dries and cracks, so it looks like cracked lava stone over the hot magma. But this is the simple one, and there's then other basing items you can put on, like sand, or I don't know, like 3D printed plans or whatever, or you can even sculpt things yourself. But this is then for the bases. And then I would say let's go ahead with the building step. And one thing I said in the beginning, there will be 3 tips from my end, what you need for a good table that would definitely change your game. The first one is maybe a bit unexpected, but it has to do with light. So I really noticed when I started out with painting or building, I was just sitting under my living room lamp, and usually it is not directly above you, or even if you sit directly under it, it is usually not the super bright light. It's usually a bit warm, and when you really have a light that is neutral, you definitely see a difference also how the colors look. So one thing I can recommend is getting a good light. And this is one I use currently. This was definitely also recommended by Emil and the team at some point. One of those lamps you can find on his website. One of these desk lamps that have daylight capability. And it is just a big difference if you have this nice light. It's a bit overblown now because of my camera, but it is basically neutral daylight that you have, and it is just, there's also some scores as to how natural the colors look under the light. I'm not sure how good this specific lamp is, but some of these hobby lamps, even RGG has a super fancy one, they do have this little score as to how natural or how true the color is under that light. So having a good desk light or table light is definitely a game changer and will make your painting and your hobbying more comfortable. And little side note, if you have daylight in your face when you're hobbying, you also do not get tired, so you can hobby longer, which is amazing. This will bite you in the end, but for your painting sessions, it's definitely a slight plus. Now, let's start building as we discussed, to go back to square one. So we have our sprue here. This is from the new Warhammer Darkwater box, and we will build one of the Blight Templars that comes with this box. So, as I said, usually these sprues come also with assorted building manuals. They usually look like this, and there's a word to say these building manuals, even within GW or also other manufacturers, they definitely vary in quality, and you need to be careful that you really have the right pieces, because sometimes the numbering is not correct, and you just need to double check that you have the right pieces, because sometimes it's not the right picture or not the right number attached. So you really need to be careful that you have the right piece, but usually these are quite easy to follow. So let's start with getting this ready. And what is here with the nippers? These nippers, they have 2 different sides. This is like a flat edge, and then a not so flat edge. And you always want the flat edge to be near the plastic that you cut off, so the actual miniature piece. and depending on how sharp your nipper is, you can do it much more closely. From my experience with these are 30-ish euros if you buy them, but there's also a much more expensive one like God Hand or something. They cost, I don't know, 70, 80, 100 bucks, which some Gundam folks use, which I hear are absolutely amazing. But this one works well for me, and it's also price, from a price point, a nice middle ground. And you do want to cut where the sprue meets the mini, and then you just be very careful and take your time with this if this is your first time cutting things from a sprue, because sometimes I hear people not knowing if this is part of the mini in a detail or if this is just a sprue connecting to the actual piece. So just look at it, and usually it should be relatively clear what the mini is and what just a part of the sprue is. This is definitely doubly interesting here from this set, because these, like often with Warhammer Quest or other box games that GW sells, is that these are manufactured in a way that's called push fit. So there's little nubs and little places to put the nubs in. So you definitely technically do not need glue, but it is definitely varying. These sets that I have, or the minis from this box that I've built so far, they are quite good, and usually there's not big gaps anywhere or like cracks that leaves open, but sometimes it's still good to double check, or at least shorten the nubs a little bit, because you see here the nub that goes here into the hole on the other side is quite long. So what I do is usually I just cut off, I don't know, 1 or 2 millimeters to not come into a situation where I cannot push it in farther because the nubbin is too long. Now we cut off the first 2 pieces, and what do we do now? Now we get out our hobby knife, because still, if you cut off something from a sprue, there will always be the place where you cut it off from the sprue, and you might always see it, or there's always a little piece and a little nudge that still jumps out. So what do you do with the hobby knife now? You can actually use the sharp edge to cut off the big pieces that are still on there, and then use the dull edge, or you can also use the sharp edge if you're brave, and then gently scrape off the rest of it. And also there's things called sprue lines, which is basically from the part where the 2 parts of the thing where the glue came in. I forgot how it's called now. The mold lines, not the sprue lines, that's the name. There's mold lines where like the 2 pieces from the mold came together, and basically if you have the mini in between my hands where the mold pieces come together, you always have this little line where ever so slightly the glue is basically pressing into where they are separated. So there are always these little lines that you can also scrape off, because nothing is more annoying that if you prime a mini and paint it and then you have this sprue line running down the leg that just looks odd, or sometimes even because these sprues are very well designed, quote unquote, you have the sprue line, the mold line over the face or something like that. So it's good to just scrape it off. It's usually very quick, and these few extra seconds of work you put in will definitely uplift your fun with the mini afterwards, because it will just look that much better. Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, we've all been there. You think you hit all the mold lines and you scrape them all off, and then you prime it, and then you still see it in the end, right? So that can also happen. That is quite annoying. Or you just forgot this very obvious piece on the arm where you cut it off the sprue, and then there's just this big piece still standing out But yeah, it's just plastic and you can just cut it off later. So now we scraped it off and cleaned it nicely, and now we just have to find the right place. And I think Husky wrote always test fit before gluing, which is a fantastic tip, is to really look where actually does it go and how does it work, to see that you do not put it in the wrong place. So the good thing with these push fit minis is you can actually just push them in and paint them later in sub-assemblies if you want to. So like if you have a shield arm that you just push on, you can take it off later, which is definitely also a neat thing. So, but what I also do is, even though the push fit might be nice, there's always a situation like here, not sure if you can see it, but there's a little bit of a hole between the leg and the upper thigh here, so I just put a little bit of glue in, and this is what I mean with the extra thin. You can just use the brush applicator, hold the plastic together, and then just swipe the brush over and the glue will flow into the cracks. And then you just hold it for a moment. Just need to make sure, because it's so thin, it actually flows very well. So it can be that it flows somewhere where your finger is, and then you have the thumbprint problem when there's a nice plastic thumbprint on the Mini. But with Nurgle it's not super problematic. I think it's just rusted armor. So that's also the beauty of some of these lines, especially Nurgle's very forgiving if you do mistakes. If there's a half melted face, was always the case, right? As a Nurgle dude. So that looks better now. Fantastic. And then we just continue. I have my little thingy here, and now it actually is the other piece of it. So you really want to be as close as you can and just cut it off quickly, and then you can clean it with the knife. And some people do really enjoy building a lot. Some people hate it. For me, it's nice to have the achievement of this somewhat 2D sprue situation, and then having the build Mini. So it's sometimes cool when you then build it, but I'm usually rather neutral about it. It's just a necessary step for me to get to the fun part, which is the painting. But if you also look into things like kit bashing, which is where you use kits that are not supposed to go together and build basically your own kit from it, which is called kit bashing. So you bash together different kits. Can also be quite fun then to build something completely new and unique. And now we run into something that I mentioned earlier. Now these nubbins here are a bit in the way, and we definitely want to cut them slightly. You can also cut them completely off and just glue it together if you're annoyed by it. I know some people do it, and sometimes that is then the way to go, because they do not align perfectly or are just in the way in the end. Yeah, sometimes these pieces are maybe also ever so slightly warped, and then it is difficult to push them in. But yeah, this is definitely the most annoying one from these. The others were quite good to build. Yeah, but I think this is okay like this. And then we have the breast, the stomach, the gut plate, which we'll quickly put on. Clean it. It is definitely sometimes not only cosmetic with cleaning it. Sometimes these parts where it was connected to the sprue are then the exact pieces where it goes together or into the other side of the Mini. So having that residual plastic on there that is too much will definitely make it impossible for you to get the pieces together perfectly. So you have to clean your Mini in these places for sure, otherwise it is simply not closing properly, and then you have little cracks and gaps and they just look annoying. But there's also things, and sometimes it is just because the design of the pieces is so bad that it's simply almost impossible to make it fit perfectly. So there will always be a little crack there, no matter what you do. There's also things you can do there. One of the things is you can also use things like green stuff or milliput or whatever. One thing I really like, however, is a thing called sprue goo. And this is basically just the rest of a previous glue bottle I had. And what you do is you just throw in leftover pieces of your plastic sprues and they will dissolve into the glue and then form this gray goo, sprue goo, which is basically melted plastic. And you can use this to fill the gaps on the Mini. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to handle because of how it dries and you have like these little strings that form. But if you have big gaps, you can use the sprue goo to put it in the crack and then use the fresh brush from this to smoothen it out. And then you have basically filled the Mini with plastic a bit, which is, for me at least, the best way to fill these gaps, because green stuff or milliput or just other ways to fill it sometimes a bit difficult to handle, then need to sand it. Here you can just smooth it out with the glue after, and then it's also closed. So definitely another nice trick is to look into sprue goo. Make your own. Very, very handy, definitely. So almost done. The only thing that is missing is the rest of the last arm here, and then this guy, which is then also officially the last Mini from the dark water box that I completed. I built the whole of the pox wretches and the other blind templars yesterday evening, so then I'm officially done with that, and I just need to paint them all. Will be quick, I guess, right? So having this more in the camera, sorry, and then we can put them in here, and then we plug this arm here, and then we're golden. And then he just gets on this base, and then he has this nice little decoration piece, and then he's good to go to prime and to paint. Really liking these Minis from the dark water box. If you're into Nurgle, definitely something to look into. Now we built our Mini, and let's say we have also already primed it. There's a few ways that can help you to accentuate it. So this is Mini. This is from the Demonifuge box from the Sisters of Battle. And there's like this jumping sister, and then he's some sort of elf dual wielding. Pretty cool dude. I primed in just black. Now I will show you something what you can do to accentuate the Mini more, which you can do without an airbrush or without a rattle can. Because what you can do is do a zenith highlight. You can do that one with a rattle can or with an airbrush. And what a zenith highlight is comes from the zenith, from when the sun is at its highest, so directly from above or from a slight angle. And what happens is when you have a black prime Mini and spray white paint over it, then it will be brighter at the top and still black at the bottom. And this will help you pick out details and also makes it easier for you to paint brighter colors over it. because if you have like you want to paint it yellow or red, you will have quite the hard time with doing it over black. Will be many layers, will be annoying because it doesn't cover well, and you need 1,000,000 layers, and you still will never get the same vibrancy compared to painting it over a brighter primer. You can also just prime it white or gray, but usually I sometimes prefer to have a zenithal because it really helps to pick out the details, and it really helps you already with lighting. And if you really want to use it to its fullest, there's a few techniques out there. Some you might heard about is called like a smash chop or slap chop, where you really accentuate this with a dry brush, and then use contrast paints or other paints like that to make painting really quick. And dry brushing is something I want to do now with you to show you how I approach it. So dry brushing, very quickly, is basically a technique where you use a almost dry brush with pigment on it to paint the mini with. What this does is it's not painting the mini as usual. It usually only hits then the raised areas and leaves a more dry finish, which is very nice to just pick out details or highlights, which is very good for this technique. And dry brushing is a skill that is sometimes a bit overlooked I think, because it can really help you pick out details for big minis as well, or if you do terrain, you really cannot go without dry brushing, I would say. But what brush to use for dry brushing? You could also just use an old brush and cut the bristles off. There's definitely few specifically made dry brushes from a few brands out there that look a bit like this. But what I like to use nowadays is just use these cheap makeup brushes. I think these cost like $3 or $4 in a drugstore here near me, and this is for, I don't know, to put on makeup. And I like these because they're very soft and they are perfect for me for dry brushing. So definitely another nice tip from my end is to look into makeup brushes, or if you have one that is new and you have at home, just try it or steal it. I bought it. But what you do is, and I usually use some tissue paper, which is another thing definitely handy to have on your table, is some paper towels to wipe off paint or the spilled oil or whatever. There's also dry brush palettes you can get, or like texture palettes that will help you with getting the excess paint off. But you can also just use a paper towel, which is doubly cool for me because it definitely also takes out the moisture, which helps with the dry brushing aspect of it. Yes, there's definitely like Snow says, there's definitely some stores that have like dry makeup brushes that you can look into. You can also just buy them on your web shop of choice. So what color do you use for dry brush? Usually you want the highlight to be quite dramatic, so you use a very bright color that really stands out from the black. So you can either use like the sky gray from Vallejo, or usually what I like to use is the AK Ivory. And then what you do is what I do is I just put it, after a good shake, on the paper towel just a little bit, and then you, let me see if I can, I think now you can see the paint a bit better. Gently dab it in the color, and then really work it in the paper towel, and there's almost nothing left that you can see. And then what you want to do is you ever so gently do circling motions on the mini, and if you really see that you have some, if it's still too wet, you will definitely see, because you have some streaks, but then you just gently work over it, and depending on what your goal is, and if you do it in multiple passes with like a gray and then you go over it for a white, you can then even just do it from top to bottom, or you just do circling motions if you want to have it. I wanted to have a more general highlight, and this is already, and you already see it. It really picks out the details quite nicely, and what sometimes I think, or I forget, or people forget, is that also with dry brushing, you can do it in multiple coats, which means if you really want to up the intensity from the dry brush, you can definitely do it multiple times to really build up that punchy highlight, especially if you want to use a technique like slap chop or something, where you really reliant on the contrast of these highlights. And what is this then for, basically? I mean, firstly, you just have it to, okay, I didn't see, yeah, there's an eyebrow I didn't see, or there's this little pouch I didn't see, and this then really helps you with making choices as to where to put your highlights on the Mini. If you then see, okay, this is where the highlights are, where the light would hit. This is basically what this does, is to see where the raised areas are, where the light hits first. So then really helps you to choose to where to put your highlights. And if you then really want to do it with this slap chop or smash chop or whatever technique, you would do this quite strong and quite aggressively, and then use these rather translucent paints that are called instant colors, or whatever they're called, like the ones from GW, contrast paints. And since they're translucent, you will definitely still see the difference between the raised areas and the dark areas. So for example, if I then put a violet contrast paint over his coat, the raised one will be more a pinkish, and the other then would be more a darker violet tone, to really have this distinction. And it is generally considered a very fast technique if you want to quickly churn out a unit or an army. This is definitely a technique, but generally I think dry brushing is a neat technique and skill to look into, and it's not to be quick or cheat or anything. It is just to really help you see where the highlights are, and then you can still paint over it. And I would say it's definitely also not super easy to do it perfectly, so really take your time, and rather wipe it for too long, or rather longer, on the paper towel or your texture board or whatever, than too quickly, because if it's still too wet and you do it, it will just ruin your dry brush. And if you really want to do it to pick out the highlights, it won't, because it does not only stick to the raised areas, but also to the ones you probably do not want to hit. So make sure that it is really, really dry, and then you also then just clean it in the end, like the regular brush. But if you do it, you cannot really use it then for dry brushing anymore. Really has to be dry when you use it again. Now our Mini is dry brushed, and then we paint it with the standard approach. Brushes. And this leads me to tip number 2 for today, is having at least one really good brush. This makes all the difference. And what do I mean with a really good brush? It is definitely important and useful to have like your workhorses and your synthetic brushes, or the brush that you use for doing base coats and do the biggest chunks of your painting. But it is definitely for highlight work and for the final touches, for me, invaluable to have a good brush that has a sharp tip, holds paint well, and is very predictable as to how I use it. When I started out and I got my first sable brush, which is the brush or the version of brush I recommend, is to have a good sable brush. Usually these are Kolinsky sable brushes. Makes really all the difference, because the sharp tip they have is definitely unmatched compared to having synthetics. but still also not the thing you need when you start out. But if you start out and you feel, hey, this is fun, and you really need a quick boost, and you really need a quick win, having a good brush is definitely something that would level it up by a big margin when you start out. So having a good brush, like also here, the one from the Kolinsky Squidma set, this is the S, so the small one is the one that I currently use the most. At some point definitely need a refill on these, since they do wear out depending on how often you use them and how well you care for them. Brush care is something I can discuss in a moment. But for just doing the base coats, having a synthetic brush where you're not sad that if after a few sessions you throw it away, or having it a bit longer is also fine, because you just use it to do base coats. But definitely having one that is behaving as you want it to, that doesn't have like a crooked bristles or something like that, is important. So even here, if you didn't feel this is fun for you, you can also invest a bit more. There's also other brands like, I don't know, Winsor Newton or Da Vinci that sell quite decent synthetic brushes. But having a really good sable brush is definitely advisable. So definitely my tip number 2 to level up your painting. Now, let me maybe put my wet palette a bit more here in the light. And this is also already tip number 3, back to back, to level up your painting. Just let me put a little bit more water in here. As I said, it is totally fine to not use a wet palette when you start out. You can just do whatever. I used a dry palette or a plastic palette in the beginning, but you do really feel and see that the paint is drying fast if you use acrylic paints. You don't have to refill a lot, and firstly it's wasteful because unless you just use very small amounts, but it's also not super easy to thin them, and it's also sometimes annoying to refill all the time, and mixing is also not really something you can do on a regular basis or really test out a bit. But a wet palette, which is my tool number 3 to level up your painting by a million, is to get a wet palette. So what is a wet palette? This is basically a plastic tablet with a sponge and then a paper on top where you put the paint on, and the wet sponge will give up moisture to the paint, so it will be fresh for days. And usually these come with a lid. Definitely a lot of squiddly plugs here today. This is the Redgrass Squidma palette I have. These come with a lid, so you can just put the lid on, and then the paint will be fresh the next days. Your mileage might vary depending on the humidity of the area where you live. You sometimes see in the Squidma videos they have like humidifiers on the table because it's so arid where they live, so the paint will definitely dry faster. I live in Germany, and for me it's relatively fine. I can put a lid on and then it holds for days or sometimes even a week or so before I have to consider to throw it away. So definitely helps, especially if you have an ongoing project where you mixed and then you still have the paint mixed on your table, and just continue. Now, and how do you work with the paint on the wet palette? Generally, it is always good to thin your paints. This is one of the few things where I think especially beginners have issues with when you do not thin your paints enough. Because if you just use it fresh from the bottle or out of the tube, it is usually too thick, and then it will give you difficulties, and it will dry with the texture, and then it's really difficult to build up layers or even highlights because there's some actual texture from the too thick paint on your mini. So what you want to do is you use water. You do have water from underneath, but also from the top. And then let's just use this color here. This is like the Screamer Pink. You put a little bit of water and a drop of water there. and to thin it. And depending on what you want to do, you can thin it into different levels. For just base coating, you do not want to thin it too much, but also not too little, as to not have it too thick in the end. So let's say we just want to paint this little cloak here, and then you just drag a brush and just let the brush follow the shape of the mini, and be careful that you hit what you want to hit. Some people say painting mini is a little bit like paint in numbers, or I'm not sure what the English term is. In German, Malnachzahlen, where you have this these pictures with the numbers and the shapes, and then just paint one color and one number. If you really want to start out, it's for base coating, it's basically the same, right? And then we just painted this, and if you just paint it very thin, it's then also a little bit translucent. Also, a word on paint translucency and paints, depending on the paint brand and also the paint color, it is very different how well they cover. The same color from a different brand can color differently because they have just better pigments and they have a better formula for their paints, but usually you have the same thinness with colors that are notoriously bad in coverage. And a few of those are definitely yellow. Yellow red is definitely difficult to get a full opaque layer on it if you do not use the right colors to start off with. So always think about what you want to do is when you paint one of these colors, that you have a good base coat or a good base where you paint over, to not make your life difficult, because having an opaque layer of yellow over a very dark primer is very difficult to achieve. So think about maybe using a color that covers well, like a gray, and then paint the more mustard yellow over it, and then you do yellow highlights, for example. That will be an easier approach, for example. Now, usually it is, if you then work here on the palette, we just thinned it. This was now more our base coat color, but if you want to thin it a bit more, I need to have my other piece of paper here. You can also use it to glaze, and I sometimes feel especially beginners have struggles with glazing because they really do not get the right consistency, or then gets too watery, or it's too thick, or it's too thin, and nothing happens. Glazing is really nice to just give it a little bit of a hue. I had like in other color theory, I think it's called, giving it a filter, for example. But usually glazing is when you slowly work your way or blend two colors and you glaze it over. What you then do firstly is you just add a little bit of more water to have it more thin, but then you also have a lot of water on your brush, with very little pigment, and then it gets really runny on your brush. What you can do then is just use your paper towel and just ever so slightly touch the brush on the paper towel, so it's the big part of the moisture gets sucked out of it, and then you have less moisture with mostly the same amount of paint on there, and then you can use that to just give it a very slight hue. This is definitely not used for base coating, but if you just have this sword that has this reflection and you just want to have this purple reflection on there, you can definitely do this with the glaze. This is also a way to really slowly get to a color, because you then can glaze over it again to make it a little bit more intense, and again until you have the right intensity. And I think generally this is a good exercise to get a feel for how the paint behaves, and also gives you, if you can manage it, a lot of control what the end result is. Because if it's too runny, it will just run over the plastic and then into an area where you do not want it to. So it's definitely nice for you to test this. And general word of advice is paint bravely. It's just plastic, it's just paint, you can paint over it, and if you do not like the result, you either paint over it or you paint the next one. Definitely also a nice advice is do not get stuck with one piece, continue with the next one to get the repetition in. It will be hard to master everything with just one mini, and also you will not get better if you paint an army and paint just 100 shields before you do something else. So also something I would advise is do minis to completion. Start it, finish it, and then do the next one. And it's also sometimes nice, especially if you just start out. Keep your first painted mini and just keep it as a memento for how you started out. Do not sell it, do not paint over it, and just look at it back in a few months or few years to see how much you have improved. It's definitely nice to keep that. And then also a little bit of a last pep talk here from that is do not compare yourself with Angel Reales or some of these painters, like these professionals that do it for a living. And if you say, wow, they do anime like this non-metallic metal or whatever, always only compare yourself to your last mini. This will make your life and your psyche easier and definitely your painting more enjoyable, to not get stressed and not get imposter syndrome because you think you're not good enough. Because they paint for years and they do it full time. You probably do not. You just started out, or you do not paint for as long, or you do not wish to paint display minis. So just use it as inspiration and compare yourself to yourself. Now we paint his trousers. Just use blue here, and it's always good, as you see, when I thin it here, then it's always good to give it a little bit of twist to get a sharp point in the end. Like drag the brush over the palette and twist it while you do it, to get excess paint off it and have that nice sharp tip. And in between, when you clean it, which you should also regularly, because then the paint might dry, which then may also kill your brushes. Definitely regularly rinse the brush. And there might even be some crazy people out there that lick their brushes after cleaning. Crazy to me, to give it a sharp tip. I do see the advantage, but still not for me. But yeah, some crazy people out there. No judgment, of course. So yeah, this is a few tips for painting. It is good to give yourself a little bit of time. You can also, of course, thin it on another palette that is not a wet palette, but it's definitely much easier also to mix, because you can really then see even there's a little bit of a journey over here happened, and definitely some different stages of paints and mixing going on here. So yeah, take your time and experiment a little bit with it. Now let's switch up minis and maybe show you. So this is a little bit of a Tyranid here, a little floating Tyranid brain. Now we talked about base coating, and the thing also with base coating is, let's maybe use a little bit of a brighter color and mix it a little bit. So we go over here with that. The thing with base coating is, you really want the color to be opaque before you move into the next layer. And this can mean, as our Lord and Savior Duncan Rhodes also said, that you might need 2 thin coats or sometimes more, depending on the color. Sometimes one thick coat also works, but usually a few thin coats will make your life easier. So let's paint this brain of this little dude here, and then just use this. And you can, not sure if you can really see it well, but you can also see, especially when it dries, that there's still some of this gray showing, and that it looks a bit spotty, and it is not covering perfectly. I mean, we used a bright pink here for this brain. Also not the easiest color to cover, but at some point when we have everything painted, we just let it dry, and then we can go over again after. And then for the top of the head, we use one of the blues we have here, which is usually covering a bit better. Here for the carapace, for the leg armor. This is also same. For me at least, I also feel blues can also be one of these colors that need definitely two coats, especially if you thin them, that they do not cover the best. And maybe a point for mixing colors. So most of the colors you buy in the store are already multiple pigments in there. They have multiple pigments to get the color that is to make the color in the end. And just from a chemical result is that you mix colors too often. There's two things happening. First thing is that you lose vibrancy when you mix pigments. So if you have a bright green and a bright yellow, if you mix them, this will be a very yellowish green then. But over time, if you mix and mix, you will lose vibrancy. I cannot tell you exactly why that is, but it is just how it is from a chemical situation. So you will lose vibrancy, and if you mix too much, it definitely gets, in the end, just a gray brown sludge if you mix everything together. So you also have to be deliberately with which colors you mix, and do it bit by bit, just that you do not wonder why these two bright colors are certainly not as bright anymore. Doing this little blue dude here, and this is just did not really plan for the color scheme on these dudes. It's just to show a little bit of the paint process. And also here with these little pieces, definitely also very handy to have even for your synthetic brushes, a brush that has a good tip, so you can really hit the spots you want to and not paint over and paint into an area that you just painted with a different color, so you do not need to go over and correct it. But even then, also not super problematic. Yeah. So, painted this little head up here. There's also few products out there that are called washes, which we did not cover yet. Also something to consider. What a wash generally does is they have a color and they tint the whole mini, but they're super flowy and very translucent, so they usually just run into the crevices and give contrast, which also dulling down the whole mini, which can be very effective if you just want a quick result. For example, if you just have a mini that is purely base coated in say, relatively bright colors. You know, one dude has a red shirt and blue pants and a pink hat, and you just use one wash over it, like a brown, like Adrax shade, for example. Um, just give him a brown wash. This will definitely pick out details, as the darker wash will run into the crevices and pick out. Basically, if he has a breast pocket on his shirt, there will usually be a line around it because the wash ran into these crevices, and it will pick out details for you, which gives a quick result in terms of contrast. It does not usually look amazing, and for bigger areas it looks a bit dirty or splodgy, but it can help you to work over it. Some people, even like Squidma, they encourage not to paint with washes since it's difficult to correct or find the right tone in the end, which I understand and which I also agree with. But for some quick paint scheme, you can definitely also consider washes to have some nice results here. You can also you do your own wash, which is then, if you use this black here, also thin it quite a lot, and then have just a very, very runny black here, and then you can also wash yourself, or with some other medium like Lamian medium is for me a very good one to use. This one, as it is basically the paint medium without a pigment, and then you can just do it very runny with very little pigment, and then you have somewhat of your own wash, which is another nice tip I like to do. And you can just use your wash to put it in here, and to have then the effect of it running into the crevices to pick it out even more. So, and then put this in. Yeah. A little coffee for me. So can put it in here, and then you have basically the same result as a wash, which is quite nice. Definitely better to get a pre-made one, but to make it also quicker for you and always have the same result and the same color, which is why it's sometimes helpful, especially if you have your paint scheme, have the same colors that you use, and can either just write down what the mix ratio was, or just have the colors from a pre-made one, pre-made bottle. So yeah, you can also do that, basically, and then for, as I said, the highlights, very good to have these very sharp, very good sable brushes. That will definitely help. You have a lot of control for the placement of the paint. So that's definitely an invaluable asset for me to do that and to have more fun. A lot of control. It's all about control for me when you look at these brushes, because with a sharp tip, you really do not struggle putting it where you want it to. If you have the steady hand and the eye, of course, but definitely they will not disappoint in terms of precision and sharpness. So very much, maybe from the tips, light brush and wet palette. If you had to pick one, definitely go for the sable brush. The other two you can work around, but I think you cannot for the sable brush. So this is the number one tip for today. Yeah, maybe a few last things for placing highlights is control of the amount of paint in the brush. Definitely, as I said before, twisting it over the palette or dabbing it on the paper towel to get the moisture out, to have more control as to how much paint you have. Some people also to test to see how opaque the color is, streak it on their hands or their nails to see how it behaves. But I usually just like to do it on the palette itself, and then you can place your highlights on the Mini. And maybe a little bit for in terms of techniques, we just covered dry brushing already. We had a normal, you just follow the flow of the plastic, and another one of those techniques is edge highlighting, which is surprisingly highlighting the edges, which is sometimes a bit difficult to achieve depending on what you want to edge highlight, and that is mostly due to how you hold the brush and how the paint consistency is. It has to be not runny, it has to be still intense enough to make a difference, because you want that contrast. And how you usually do it is, you do not paint it with the tip of your brush, you use the side and you just hold it against the edge and do like this. Still follow it, but not using the tip of the brush. You can do it if you have a lot of control, but usually it's easier to just gently strike the edge from the side with the brush. And there also the sharp edge of the brush will help you not overpaint, because then you can just have the brush follow the edge for you, and then have the nice contrast on the Mini in the end. Yeah, and definitely important, maybe 2 words on brush care before we maybe go open into the questions, is rinsing your brush is very important, and also even more so maybe making sure the paint is not going into the ferrule. So these are the bristles, and this silver or gold piece, depending on the brush, is called a ferrule. And when you have paint so far up that it goes into the ferrule and you do not rinse it quite quickly, it will dry in here. And if you have dried paint where the bristles are basically coming out from, it will disturb the shape of what the brush is in the end. And if you have too much dried paint in here, you won't have a sharp tip, because there's little pieces of dried paint in the ferrule, so the bristles will never be able to have a sharp tip, but they will always spread a bit, because they cannot go into a sharp tip, because there's something they have in their hand. Maybe a good representation would be if I have something in my hand, like if I have a tennis ball in my hand, I cannot do this, then I can only do this, and then it's not really sharp anymore. So you have to make sure that you rinse it a lot, so that the paint is always getting out, and you have a clean brush. Also, what is definitely advisable for these really expensive saber brushes is having brush soap. I have this one from Raphael I bought a while ago. This is soap to clean your brushes with. And this does 2 things. You just clean your brush with it and really get the paint out, which you wouldn't get just with water. And then you can also, sometimes it's a different product, but this is together like a brush conditioner. You can leave a little bit of it in there and to shape the brush, and then it will keep the shape like a little bit of a conditioner, or maybe the equivalent would be hairspray, that it really keeps the brush in shape and sharp, to have basically the shape memory of the bristles in there, so that it is always a sharp tip for the brushes. Yeah, to maybe round it up, we discussed and we built a Mini together. Important to Let me maybe clean this so we can see better. A well-built mini will also be better to paint and will look better in the end. So taking the extra time with cleaning the mold lines, closing the gaps with sprue glue or with milliput or green stuff will definitely lead to a much more enjoyable end result if it's painted. Because if there's a gap, there's a gap, and you cannot put paint in it to hide it, unless it's just a spot where you cannot see it anyway. So closing it, cleaning the mold lines will look better in the end. So definitely invest the extra minutes per mini to have this much more enjoyable result. Then priming the mini, of course, important. This one is actually brushed on. When I used this, did this one, I just brushed the primer on. Priming minis also advisable to have the paint sticking better to it, to ensure the right paint adhesion. And then when you want to use different techniques for painting, you can dry brush it, or you can do a zenithal highlight to pick out the details, or like I did here, you can take a brighter primer. If you just want to use bright colors anyway, then you can also do this, but usually it's also then easier if you have a black primer to have the shadows already on, because if it's black, is a shadow, right? So this is then also important. And we discussed things to paint and build the minis with. Always the trusty hobby knife, the paint, the hobby nippers, definitely important. Different kinds of glues we discussed. Also happy to hear which brands you prefer. My current favorite is for sure Tamiya, and we discussed the wet palette to help you keeping your paints fresh longer, enabling mixing on as an actual option, because you can mix on a dry palette or plastic palette, but since it will dry so quickly, you won't have enough use or long use of your just mixed color. So really a wet palette will open up into this quite a lot, and will make your life easier and also save paint for sure. And yeah, other things, maybe nothing you really need, but something that also I feel was a next step and opened up so many things for me as a hobbyist, is looking for an airbrush. It's definitely more a 102 thing, or I also did last year an airbrush class also on this channel here if you want to look. Definitely gave some tips there, but if there would be a fourth tool that levels up your game, it would definitely be an airbrush. But I understand people have different realities or different situations, so it might not be affordable or an option because of space or the nature that comes with an airbrush. But as a last tip from my end, definitely, if you consider, it's a super nice tool, and I wouldn't want to miss it in my arsenal anymore. All right. I think that was it for me rambling about what you can do and what tools to use and maybe how to use it for this Hobby 101 class. Definitely happy to receive questions either now or later on the server. Yeah, if you have any questions, points you want to discuss, now would be the time to do that. So thanks for your time now, for listening, and also for the points you already wrote. So yeah, if you have any questions, remarks, things you always wanted to know, definitely happy to answer that or discuss. Let's see. Yeah, thanks. This is needed to wear today. The Squidma merch, Squidma wrap. Definitely a lot of Squidma products here on the table today, be it the synthetic brushes. I asked Emil if it would be okay for me to to show these or talk about these very briefly. I'm very excited about these. When they come out, I can wholeheartedly recommend them. They're a great addition to your table, and from synthetic brushes, they definitely close the gap between the standard synthetics and sable brushes. So really nice product. You mean the Squidma synthetics? I think they close the gap. So from the synthetics I used before and the Kolinskis I used before, I always felt there's definitely a big gap in terms of how much control I have and how they behave. But these synthetics definitely are in the middle, and they close the gap by quite a lot. And if you even maybe do not want to use Kolinskis, because it's still an animal product, if you do not want this, this is the next best thing, absolutely. And they hold their tips for very long. I use them for a few months now, and they are very, very sharp still, and they behave very well. It is not a Kolinsky, it's not a sable brush, but it is really the next best thing. So if you want to have a very good set of synthetics, or do not want to buy sable because you do not want to have animal products on your table, this is the next best thing, absolutely. Yeah, I'm also very happy that this was possible, but definitely happy to spread the word that these are as good as they are. All right, do we have other questions? Definitely with the Tamiya. Yeah, the Tamiya glue is fantastic. I think Tamiya definitely has a few nice products. Only used the glue so far, but this is immediately became my favorite plastic cement. But yeah, happy to receive other questions. Anything you are curious about, or anything you wanted to share, anything you would like to discuss. Have you worked with Tamiya epoxy putty before? No, I have not. The whole putty thing, green stuff thing, I have not I haven't done a lot. I did a bit of green stuffing, and I do have some milliput, but generally I have not done a lot of sculpting. I think the craziest things I sculpted were little mushrooms for some bases. I did for my goblins, but this is the extent that I have with these kind of epoxy putties or other products. But definitely something I want to try more in the future. So no, sadly not. But can you recommend it, Sam? Is this something you would say, for even for starters, a good product to test out? I mean, what we also saw, a lot of the bases, for example, Lucas did in his recent videos. They used milliput or epoxy sculpt. Not sure what the manufacturer is there. You can do some very cool things. Very cool things with it for basing, or for sculpting on the minis themselves. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with the little mushrooms. It was also not super difficult to form them, I'd say. But yeah, having a bit more extensive, definitely something to look into. I think because we just like each other so much, Lasse. That's why you miss me so much. I miss you too. Absolutely. Um, we met last autumn in Norway, Libsen and myself, with a few other peeps also from the server, and we had a mighty good time. So definitely something we have to do again soon at some point. Yeah. Other questions, points, other tips you might want to share with the group or remarks you have. Definitely eager to hear from you. Oh yeah, definitely. Norway and Sweden, definitely nice places to visit. Not only for the people that live there, but also from a view. Norway is an absolutely beautiful country. The Sweden is maybe nice because of the people, not so much because of the views, but also nice if you come from Germany. Yeah, I'm from Germany. I'm living in Berlin. I grew up south of Berlin. I'm German, and my mother tongue is German. Can't hide it. Can't really hide it in the end. Fantastic. Yeah, I'd say let's give it a few more moments if people want to ask questions. Otherwise, I would say thank you for tuning in for this last day of SquidCon. There will be more classes after this. The next one is storytelling, starting at 7 p.m. Of my time, at least. So it will be in, what is it, 22 minutes. Um, and yeah, if you have questions afterwards, I'm Matayus on the server, so feel free to send me DM or ask me in mini hobby talk or wherever. Definitely um, something I'm happy to always help with. So yeah, perfect. Yes, Sam, exactly. Storytelling with you. Looking forward to it. So I would then say, if there's no further questions, many thanks for your time. I had a lot of fun. Let me know if you have further questions. And then I'd say I'll leave it at that and wish you a nice Sunday and a nice rest of SquidCon on the Sunday. Then have a good afternoon, evening, morning, and see you on the server. I'm out. Bye bye.